see that, yeah? So it says, welcome to Powers and Complaints Team Communication Training, yeah?
Yes, we can, thank you.
Okay, lovely. Let me just check. Right, okay. So this is actually a slightly shortened version of the one that we normally do, because we tend to do it in person and it's over about 2.5 hours. So what I've done is just shortened it down to fit into hopefully an hour, or maybe slightly less than an hour. And really it's just to give you an overview of what we do here within the Powers and Complaints team. As Dr. Chauhan said, it does really relate to the RBFT complaints process. It's not a standardized process, so it is really just for this trust, but it would give you some idea, hopefully, wherever you're working. So the idea of this is that we will understand the Powers and Complaints team processes and grow confidence in dealing with patient concerns. So normally when we do this, as I said, we do it face to face, and there's a lot of interaction and participation from those attending. We won't be doing those exercises today. So the first exercise we normally do is discussing why we complain and sharing an experience about a complaint that you might have made yourself, and that generally generates quite a good conversation. But because of the setting of this virtual training, we won't do that today. What we'll do instead is just have a think about why is it that people might complain. So what is the motivation for them to complain? And I've just jotted down some notes here. So I think one of the main reasons why people complain, and the NHS is a very emotive subject. So, you know, when you think about the NHS, people feel very much that it is something that they've paid into, it's theirs, they've seen it develop, they've seen it kind of nurtured, and they're proud of it. So when things go wrong for them, it's very disappointing, and they have high expectations, and there is a loss of confidence in the organisation, and also sometimes a mistrust of clinicians as well. So, you know, when we think about why do people complain, I think we've got to think about all of those things and how it is a very emotive subject. So that's on a basic level. On a more personal level, there are always individual circumstances behind why people complain. So there are always going to be frustrations and worries and stresses that have led them to make that complaint. And I think we need to consider what's behind the complaint and try to understand all the facets behind that. So not just thinking of it as a negative thing, but trying to see it as a learning exercise and to understand why they felt the need, why they've been motivated to complain. So that is on the more personal side. Hopefully that is everyone with me? Does that make sense? Yeah, you still there?
Yep, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, good.
Yeah.
So thank you. So really, I'm thinking of some examples of complaints that we've had, and you know, we've had people that have maybe been unhappy about wait times for surgery and that kind of thing. And actually, sometimes it's not the individual themselves who's unhappy. It might be that there is a whole other situation behind that. So it could be in terms of an elderly gentleman I'm thinking of waiting for surgery. You know, his children, his grown-up children, were putting a lot of pressure on him to find out what's going on, why is there a delay in getting that surgery. There was an ex-partner who was supposed to be helping out, so looking after the cat while he came in for the surgery, and she needed to know what was happening because she had her own life and plans to make. So she was frustrated at not knowing what was going on as well, and that was adding pressure on the individual, on the patient. So sometimes it's thinking about you know, all of that background information and why are people getting so upset about this. It's always bigger than what it seems, really. So let's moving on from that. So thinking about why are patients reluctant to complain? And this relates to a survey from the Parliamentary Health Service Ombudsman. It's actually relating to mental health patients, but it is also relevant to us. So 1 in 5 people said they did not feel safe while they were in care. 50% said that they experienced delays in their treatment. 4 in 10 people said they waited too long to be diagnosed. But 48% said they would be very unlikely to complain. 1 in 3 felt their complaint would not be taken seriously. And the main reasons for the reluctance to complain was not wanting to cause trouble, so not wanting to kind of put a black mark against their name. And this is something we hear frequently here is, you know, what's the point in complaining? What's going to change? What's going to happen? And also, I don't want my treatment to be affected. So that's something that we hear a lot. And that's very concerning for us because we like to feel that we are a very kind of open and transparent trust, and that if somebody makes a complaint, it's not going to be detrimental to their treatment, and they've still received the same level of care and treatment regardless. So it's thinking about that as well and how that might impact on patients and their families and how they feel about coming forward. So that was quite an interesting thing, I thought. Now, just moving on to our own process, as I said, this is an internal process relating to the Royal Berks Trust. So hopefully it can be carried across to wherever you're working. This is specific to us at the moment. There are 2 processes that we use if you're working here, and that is the PALS process. So PALS as in the acronym for our department, Patient Advice and Liaison, and also the formal complaints process. And I'll go through the 2 separately. So the PALS process is supposed to be a quick and easy resolution for a concern. So it might be that somebody highlights an issue and you're able to resolve it kind of within a few days. It's quite a straightforward thing. And it might be that you're having a conversation with somebody on a ward, or you're picking up the phone and speaking to a patient or a family member, and you're resolving something pretty quickly and easily. So that would be what we would call a PALS concern or an informal concern. Those can be raised with us by any method, so email, letter, in person, telephone. They're the kind of main ways that we receive those PALS concerns. And ideally, we have 5 working days to respond to those concerns. So that's something to bear in mind as well. The GP concerns, slightly different process, that's 30 days. And we have an inbox whereby GPs liaise directly with our department, and then we find out what the issue is, resolve the issue, and go back to them within that 30 days. Okay, so is everyone clear on that? Hopefully you are. Right. Moving on. Okay, so in terms of the PALS, thinking about those informal concerns, these are just some kind of checks to think about when you're dealing with those. So obviously introducing yourself clearly. So the hello, my name is. Giving a meaningful apology. So really thinking about, you know, why you're apologising. Active listening, so maybe repeating back to them some of what they've said to you, making sure you understand what's being said. Mirroring, so in terms of body language, so if it's a face-to-face interaction, you know, if they're sitting with the leg crossed, you cross your leg, that kind of thing. It's basic kind of neuro-linguistic programming stuff, like I'm sure you've heard of. Taking notes, so taking down the most pertinent points of the conversation if you need to, but not being wrapped up in kind of writing lengthy notes, just jotting down brief notes if you need to. And then being patient and empathetic. So really trying to understand where they're coming from, like I said at the beginning. Was that somebody asking something? No. Okay. Okay. Outlining your plan and setting a realistic expectation. So this one is, and it leads on to the next one, keeping to the expectation. So this is key because quite often we see this where people say they're going to do something and then they don't deliver, and this is where things start to fall apart. So it is really important that if you tell somebody you're going to do something, i.e. I will chase this up for you and I will call you back at 3 p.m, that you do that. I mean, if it's 4 p.m. or whatever, that's fair enough. But, you know, if it's like a week down the line, that's a different scenario, and it just undermines what you've already agreed. And that causes obviously problems further down the line. So please do keep to the expectations. Don't give unrealistic expectations. If you're going on leave or you're not going to be around for the next few days or whatever, don't agree things with people that you can't do. Being assertive with a clear and a calm voice. So it's thinking about your your tone and your how quickly you're speaking. All of those things play a part in how you're building a rapport with that patient or the family. So it's really just being mindful of how you're coming across, and, you know, also thinking about the language that you're using. So if you're talking to someone who is also a doctor, for example, then you might use different language or different terminology to somebody who might not understand those terms, might not be familiar with them. So it's really thinking about your audience again and how to build that rapport and build that trust with them. If it's been a difficult conversation, remembering that it isn't personal and always kind of having a moment just to sort of, you know, take it all in and maybe having a chat with a colleague, and that kind of self-reflective stuff that we do here in our profession. So yeah, I mean, that's really it for the informal concern side of things, thinking about how you would do that. Now, the formal complaints is a slightly different process. So this is, I'll run through this with you. And again, on our training, you know, we go into quite a lot more detail, but this is just an overview on our main training day. But this is just an overview. So we have 25 working days to respond to a complaint, a formal complaint, and formal complaints must come in by writing. So that's one of the key differences. We don't accept formal complaints over the telephone or in person or any of that. We need them to be written. Generally, it's by email these days, obviously. We do still get the odd letter, written letter. So either way is fine. So 25 working days. So it starts on day 0, and we will receive the complaint, and then the team will acknowledge it. So we acknowledge it now by telephone, email, or letter. So I think generally we tend to, because I'm just getting into the complaint side of things, so this is all a bit new for me as well, but I think generally we telephone to say we've received and just check that we've got everything we need from them, and then we'll drop them an email. I think the letter bit is going now, unless they request to have a letter. So an investigating officer is appointed at that time, and that would be somebody who was part of that specialty. So it stays within the specialty, but it wouldn't be somebody who had been too closely involved. So if, for example, the complaint was naming a clinician, that person would not investigate themselves, essentially. But it could be that that they were investigating the work of a colleague. So it would stay within the specialty, within that area. They are appointed, and then it is their role to contact all the necessary staff and ask for statements. So really they're building up a case to say, you know, to find out what happened, to answer that complaint. And no one's in trouble or anything like that, but it's just to gather statements to say, you know, this is what happened. And we're sorry as well if we've, you know, made a mistake or we've caused any upset. It's okay to say sorry. I'll come to that later because that's a separate issue I want to mention. But yes, so it's the role of the investigating officer to gather that information and also to review the medical records. And also at that point, hopefully to call the patient or the family member and introduce themselves and just to say, I will be investigating your complaint. Is there anything else you wanted to add? Have I understood all the points in the complaint? So to clarify all of that. So that would be the first part of this. And then, so during the next few days, so we've jumped on to day 15 now, bearing in mind this is a 25 working day process. So day 15, we would be hoping that we would receive a draft response, a written response back from the investigating officer. And that would be sent back to us in the complaints team. And then we would kind of polish it up and it would go to be signed by the exec team. So generally that's the chief executive, but if he's not around, one of the other exec team would sign it. In the meantime, there's a couple of other little bits that happen. So we would send it back to you as investigating officer, if you were investigating, just to make sure that you were happy with what if we'd edited it at all. So occasionally we might take out certain words or slightly change things around if we felt it would read better, or if we needed to amend any grammar or anything like that. And then we would send you back the final version just to show what was going to be sent to the patient or family member. So yeah, at that point, it's your opportunity to say, actually, you know, I'm not happy with that. I want this edited again or whatever. Hopefully you wouldn't need to. So then by day 25, the response would be signed off by the chief exec, and then the case is closed, it's done. But we would want to as well just look at the action, so the learning from the complaint, because it's not all just a paper exercise about responding to a complaint. As I said, there is a reason why these people come to us, so we need to look at that and the motivation to complain, and try to gauge any actions or any learning from the complaint. Hopefully that all makes sense. I kind of run through that quite quickly. So one thing that we do, if you were ever to be in this position where you were investigating a complaint, is we always include the investigating officer's guide. So you would receive a copy of that along with the complaint that you were investigating. So that is really kind of a bit of an idiot's guide, really, if you like, to what to do. So there is a checklist in there of what you need to be looking at. There is a template for a draft response. So you can't really go too wrong looking at that guide. Okay, so that's just talking about that. So that is sent out every time you receive a complaint to investigate. Okay, so in terms of written responses, what we're looking for from you is that you structure your communication clearly, you're thorough, and you answer all of the questions. You explain any clinical terminology, you apologise in a meaningful way, you use clear and appropriate vocab. So as I said, if you're talking to a doctor, you might use a slightly different terminology as you would to someone who wasn't familiar with that. And we do have that happen occasionally where we're kind of doctor to doctor scenario. Being open and honest, so not hiding anything, being transparent. And as I said a minute ago, being clear about what actions have been taken as a result. So what we've learned from the complaint. And I did send out to Dr. Chauhan what did I send you? A response, a complaint and a response. Just have a look at. I don't know if you had a chance to see that, but it was just an example really of somebody who had written in about something they weren't happy with to do with a fall that they'd had following their surgery, and it turned out that they had a different kind of recollection of what had happened, and also they felt that the fall had impacted on their recovery, so they were concerned about that. They were also worried it hadn't been recorded in their medical notes, so they were a bit concerned about all of those things. So hopefully you've been able to have a look at that, because it's quite a good example of a complaint where actually some of those things weren't correct. And then we also sent you the response that was sent out, and in there it goes through each point. And you know, if you've had a chance to read it, it quite clearly says that, you know, it's different recollection. What she had was a different recollection to what had actually happened, and that actually, yes, it was recorded in the notes. So yeah, it's fine to kind of say actually that, you know, what you're saying isn't quite correct, and this is what actually happened. And we hope that, you know, that's answered your questions, that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just thinking about how you can word these things in a polite and constructive way, really. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so moving on. So local resolution meetings. So this is sometimes when people complain, they're not happy with what we've sent them. So they've received their written response and they're not happy, and they ask for a meeting. And that would be generally with the investigating officer, possibly with other people involved in the complaint. But if it was about a named individual, generally we wouldn't invite that individual to come because we don't feel it's very constructive. Really depends on the complaint itself. But yeah, that tends to be how it is. So we'd have the investigating officer and then maybe somebody else who was key to the complaint if it's appropriate. And the point of that meeting is just to go over any points that they feel haven't been answered, and hopefully to come to a conclusion that everyone is happy with, and also again to agree any actions that we might take forward out of that. So they are something, those meetings are something that we do quite regularly here, and they generally are productive, and people are generally happy to come to those meetings, staff and patients, and it can be, yeah, a very useful thing to have those meetings. So that could be something you find yourself doing in the future as well. Now, in terms of those meetings, so it's thinking about what to do to prepare beforehand. So I would say, you know, it's kind of basic stuff, but know the purpose of the meeting and your role in it. So are you going to be kind of doing all the talking, or are you more of an observer? Communicating with other staff attending the meeting beforehand. So if you're able to meet or speak to the other people going, just to know who they are and who's going to kind of lead it, that kind of thing. Make sure you've read all the information before the meeting, have it with you on the day. So it's a bit easier now because we have notes on EPI electronically, and we don't have to find the paper notes and that kind of thing. But yeah, really just making sure you're well informed about the complaint before you come to the meeting, and not kind of having any surprises on the day. So support will be there from us as well, and we generally record the meeting, which is purely for their benefit, not for ours. It's not a legal thing or anything, it's just for their reference. So it's thinking about those things that we said earlier about being assertive with a clear and calm voice, considering posture and tone of voice, speed of voice, all of that stuff. So the things that we said earlier on about how you come across, really, just being open. So yeah, that's probably all I need to say about meetings. And then the final thing is, actually there's two final things, but this one on the presentation is to do with forms of authority. So that's something which we ask for here in this department. It is the consent given by the patient that we can investigate the complaint. So sometimes we've had a scenario where people don't want their family to know about anything, and they might actually decline the form of authority. So they'll say no, they're not interested in that. We do need to get that before we can proceed. So that is something that we deal with here, but it's really just to give you that background in case you're wondering about consent. Obviously, if the person's deceased, that's a different situation, and we need to look for asking for a copy of the will. And yeah, and that's a whole different scenario. But again, you don't need to worry about that. We deal with that. And the only other thing really relating to this that I wanted to say is about saying sorry. So one of the sheets that we normally give out at our training is from NHS Resolution, which is an organisation to do with. Oh, is that somebody? All right, somebody was. Yeah, so NHS Resolution provides expertise on resolving concerns and disputes. So they have written a really nice leaflet which is about saying sorry, and I can share that with Dr. Chohan to distribute. And really the leaflet is saying, you know, saying sorry, it's always the right thing to do. It's okay to say sorry. It's not an admission of liability. It acknowledges that something could have gone better, and it's the first step to learning from what happened and preventing it reoccurring. So I think sometimes we have there's a bit of reluctance from people or worries around saying sorry and thinking that, you know, that might be an admission of guilt, and what if that turns into a legal case or an inquest or that kind of thing. So really it's to confirm that it's okay to say sorry, and you know, actually it's a good thing to do, and people are very appreciative of that apology. And yeah, it means a lot to people, and we do have that comment a lot that nobody has sat down and said sorry to me, and that would have gone a long way. So it's okay to say sorry, really, is what I want to get across. And I will share that leaflet with you because I think it's a really good thing to read. Sorry, what's happening there? Okay, and that's really it from me. I've kind of done a bit of a whistle stop training with you, but hopefully you've learned a bit about our processes. And I can send you the anonymous feedback form as well if you want to fill that in. Okay. Cancel that. Sorry.
Thank you.